Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Ron Hoppe. I'm the CEO of WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions, and I'm very excited today to be joined by my very good colleague and friend, Mike Hammond. Mike is one of the leading healthcare immigration attorneys in America, and we appreciate Mike joining us. It's 7 a.m. here in the morning on the East Coast of the United States. So, Mike, thanks for being with us bright and early this morning.
Thanks, Ron. It's glad to be here with everyone. For anyone that couldn't tell, the reason Ron played that clip at the beginning is I was one of the dancers in the back. So hopefully you could pick up a glimpse of me.
Well, I wasn't going to point that out, Mike, but I'm sure others picked that up even before you disclosed that to them. But anyway, as we get started this morning, again, thank you to everyone that is joining us live today, wherever you happen to be in the world. In fact, as we get started, for those of you that have joined us, I would ask that you just take a moment and just type into the chat box or the chat feature of this webinar, just type in the country where you are currently residing so we can see the various countries that are represented by our attendees here today. So please take a moment as we prepare to get started here and just type in for us where it is that you're joining us from this morning. It's always exciting to see just the global reach and the global coverage that we're able to achieve through this medium. As we go through the presentation today, we certainly want to share valuable information with you, but we also want to be available and make time and save time for you to ask questions of Mike. But we're going to save that time for questions to later on in our presentation. And what I would ask is, as a question comes to mind, just enter your question, please, again, in the chat area of the webinar. My colleagues, Tracy and CJ, are monitoring the chat, and we'll do our very, very best to answer as many questions as we can in the time that we have available to us today. So please feel free to ask any questions that come to mind. And again, we'll do our very best to answer those for you. So with that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, the topic and the focus of our presentation today is what to expect in U.S. immigration in 2022. And as I said at the outset, I'm very, very pleased and honored to be joined by Mike Hammond. Mike and I are really going to engage in sort of our own question and answer type of format here in an effort to share the most current and relevant information with you that we can today. Just by way of quick further introduction, Mike has been practicing healthcare immigration law for, I dare say, more than 30 years. And as I said, also, Mike and his team are one of the preeminent healthcare immigration law firms in the country. It's been HealthStaff's pleasure to partner with Mike and his team for many years now. Mike, I'm not sure how many, but it's more than a few.
More than a few, yes.
Yeah, good. So as we start today, I think probably just to give us the perspective, and just to kind of lay some foundational, lay a foundation for the discussion, Mike, I thought it would probably be beneficial for everyone if you could just take a few minutes and share with us, what has been and what is the impact that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has had on immigration processing, going back to, March 2020, when this word pandemic first entered our vocabulary.
Okay. Yeah, Ron, thanks. So first of all, the first thing that comes to mind is the COVID-19 pandemic has been terrible and devastating to immigration processing. Consulates were closed, consulates were short-staffed, there were travel bans, there was changes in yes, you can petition, no, you can't, yes, you can get a visa, no, you can't. Just a variety of things that were viewed as very negative beyond the practical medical negativity of the pandemic that we've all kind of lived with. And obviously still today, we're seeing short-staffed consulates. We're seeing consulates who people get sick and are unable to come to work and have to quarantine and isolate for a certain number of days. So unexpectedly, and I'm sure that you all, where you're working at today, are seeing the exact same things. The consulate's not been immune to that. So a lot of that, and then a lot of things behind the scenes. The same things happening at the NVC and the USCIS. You're scheduled to work on a certain number of cases today, and you're not because somebody's out sick, and then now you're quarantining, et cetera. So a lot of what has happened with COVID-19 is very negative and very obvious. But there is one thing that has been particularly positive about COVID-19, and that sounds horrible, and I don't mean to diminish the medical effects of COVID-19, but for all of us in this room, there's been one huge, huge positive development, and that is the fact that there have been additional immigrant visas available for last fiscal year, this fiscal year, and next fiscal year. And let me explain that. So there's a certain number of visas given out, and by immigrant visas, that means green cards, given out per year on a fiscal year basis. And on the employment side, it's about 140,000. That's what's given out each year. The fiscal year starts in October. So from October 1st till September 30th, they're allowed to issue 140,000 immigrant visas. That includes the actual worker, that includes spouses, children, that includes processing at consulates, that includes processing at the USCIS internally here in the US. And they generally use all that up, and that's why we have what we all refer to as retrogression. However, because of COVID-19, individuals did not get family-based immigrant visas. In 2020, consulates were closed. You had a travel ban. You also had a whole lot of individuals who simply weren't looking to immigrate to the U.S. during the course of a pandemic. People are sick. People are taking care of other family members. People are simply staying put, particularly family-based cases, whether it be mothers, spouses, kids, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, et cetera, the typical family pattern. Well, what happens with those unused family unused family immigrant visas? They spill over to the employment side. So that's what the law says. That had never happened in the past. The law had been there, but it never happened because the family numbers always get used. But because of that spillover, we had a large influx in 2020, a large influx this year, and we're expected another large influx next year. So that means, as a practical matter, for all of us sitting in this room, that we're probably not going to have to utter the words retrogression, certainly not in 2022, probably not in 2023. We may see the effects for many years to come because of COVID-19. So very positive effect on people in this room.
Mike, thanks for that. And it is difficult to say that anything good has come out of the pandemic with all of the devastation and hardship that it's caused. But really great point that in terms of visa availability, the consequence of the pandemic is that a far greater number of visas is currently available and is likely to be available for the foreseeable future. And that kind of leads me, Mike, into the next question that I think many on this presentation today will be wondering about. And that is the question, from which countries will nurses or other healthcare workers have difficulty migrating to the U.S.? We know the processing times aren't the same for each country. Mike, maybe you can just speak a little bit to why that is, and then just if there's any countries in particular where there are specific challenges for healthcare workers looking to come to the United States.
Okay, so this is a fairly simple question because there are two countries that remain retrogress significantly, and that is India and China. And it's based upon country of birth, not country of nationality. It's based upon either you or your spouse's country of birth if you're married. The lines there are so long that trying to immigrate from overseas from either of those countries is not terribly practical. If you want to immigrate from either of those countries, for the most part, you need to look at a non-immigrant visa, an H or some other type of visa to get here first. Now, as far as processing times, you can really put in Manila and then everyone else. So the Manila consulate there in the Philippines, and then is on their in their own world, and then everybody else. Every other consulate in the world is processing very quickly, expediting cases quickly. Limited issues. I'm not saying there are no issues. There are certainly 221G issues from time to time that I think we'll get into later on another slide. But generally speaking, there continue to be major backlogs in Manila and not anywhere else. We will often, from other countries, I just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, myself and the candidate themselves got an email. For me, it was the middle of the night that said, hey, to a nurse candidate, and this was in Dubai, that said, hey, we had a cancellation this morning. I know you're not scheduled for 2 weeks, but if you can come in, we'll take care of you. And the nurse responded back, hey, sure, I'll be there. So that's the kind of service you get from most of the other consulates in the world.
Mike, with regards to Manila, I know that we have many people who were born in the Philippines joining us. Is it just a matter of processing capacity? Is it a matter of they've been somehow more greatly affected in terms of staffing? Any sort of thoughts or insights as to why the processing times in Manila seem to be lagging?
I think it's purely numbers. The number of people looking to immigrate from the Philippines, both on the family and employment-based side, compared to the numbers out of, say, Singapore or UAE or Lagos or any place else. So I think it's a pure numbers. I do not think that their work staff has been affected. They've obviously been affected greatly, as have everyone. But I don't think they've been affected any more than any other consulate. It's purely numbers.
All right. Just before we move on to sort of the next question, Mike, you raised or made a comment that individuals who were born in India and China, they're facing these big backlogs. I think that's pretty well known. But you had also mentioned that the eligibility for people of these who were born in these countries is based on the country in which they were born. Take a moment and just share with everyone if someone who was born in India or China is married to someone who was not born in India and China, what opportunities does that open up for them?
Yeah, so if your spouse was born in another country, you can take the chargeability of that country. So they call it cross chargeability. So if you were born in India and your spouse was born in Nepal, then you can come under the Nepal line, for which there is no queue for Nepal. So you escape the India line, you move to the Nepal line. So, and it's based just upon a spouse, not any other family relation.
Right. Okay. Very good. Now, Mike, we already touched on this a little bit, the outlook for priority dates, and you shared about visas being rolled over. Maybe can we just take a moment and just have you comment briefly on how visas are allocated and how priority dates can get backlogged or retrogressed. Just maybe just to build that thought out a little bit further.
Sure. So there are different categories of visas in the employment-based side. There's 5 categories, but there's 3 that we deal with mainly on the employment side. People refer to them as EB1, EB2, EB3. And generally, most physical therapists and occupational therapists would be an EB2, RNs, medical technologists, EB3. And it is basically a trickle down of a certain number given to EB1. If they're not used, they fall to EB2. If they're not used in EB2, they fall to EB3. There are also per country limits based upon a complicated formula that determines how many people can immigrate from a particular country. And that's why long lines have formed historically from India and China, because those are the countries where more people want to immigrate from. Historically, we've also had lines formed for the Philippines. We've had lines formed for Mexico. We've had lines formed from a variety of other countries in the past. The spillover that I talked about earlier is irrespective of any country limits. So the spillover from the family-based category that we've enjoyed the last 2 fiscal years do not kind of remove the per country limit relative to the spillover, which is why the India line for people here in the U.S. has moved forward about 4 years in the past 14 months, and why we see no retrogression coming for the Philippines either, in spite of the large numbers coming in.
Okay, good. Very good. Now, I know that in addition to having persons joining us today from many different countries, and again, if you've joined us live this morning, and if you have not already just taken a moment and just shared with us the country that you're joining us from in the chat feature, I'd encourage you to do that. We monitor very closely where people are attending from. So if you would do that, that would certainly be greatly appreciated. I also am confident that joining us this morning are not only registered nurses, but healthcare workers in other occupations. And that takes me to our next point for discussion, Mike. And if you could just share with everyone some of the immigration options or the visa options for various healthcare occupations, who's eligible for permanent residency, right from the beginning of the process, non-immigrant visas. Can you just give us a good overview of the types of visas, Mike, that various types of healthcare workers may be able to access?
Okay, sure. So some of this is broken up by occupation, and some are kind of broken down by the country you're born in or the country of citizenship. So first of all, let's take RNs first of all, because that one is the simplest. Generally speaking, unless you are from Canada or Mexico, there is not a non-immigrant visa available for RNs. So H1s are generally not available, TNs unless Mexico or Canada. From Australia, a little bit. Sometimes you can do an RN through an E3, but for the most part, not. About the only RNs that are eligible for H-1B visas are nurse educators, generally with an MSN, not necessarily nurse educators in schools, but nurse educators within a hospital setting as well. But those are very, very limited. So generally speaking, RNs are going to come in through the immigrant visa process. You're going to be sponsored for a green card from the beginning. Now, every other healthcare occupation, OTs, PTs, med techs, rad techs, cat labs, anything else can be sponsored for an immigrant visa, so a green card, from the beginning. In addition, some of those occupations also have H-1B eligibility. OTs, PTs, med techs, all have eligibility for H-1B visas. Now, depending upon who's hiring you, some H-1B visas, some employers are what we refer to as cap exempt employers. Those are employers that are, generally speaking, university hospitals, let's call them. They are nonprofit hospitals affiliated directly with the university. So there's not a lot of them. Not every nonprofit is cap exempt. But those hospitals that are cap exempt can take an OT and sponsor you for an H1 right now, anytime. There's no limit. All year round, they can sponsor you for an H1. For most hospitals, the for-profit systems, the nonprofit systems that are not affiliated with the university, they have to put you through a lottery. The lottery happens every year in April. The cases get started in February and March. So pretty soon we're right around the corner of entering what we refer to as H1B season. And there is a lottery for them, a drawing, as absurd as that sounds and as random as that sounds. That's the way the U.S. government has chosen in its brilliance to determine how we let people come in. And last year there were over 300,000 filings for 85,000 spots. So because of that, some individuals who might be eligible for an H1 might choose instead to go the green card route. Even if, let's say you're a med tech, you're eligible for an H1 in the lottery, but if you don't get in the lottery, then you've not advanced any further. Whereas with the green card process, it may appear to be slower, and depending on when you enter, it may in fact be slower, but it is a more sure route. So oftentimes individuals will opt to go the green card route as opposed to the H1, or certain facilities will opt that. But there are different options. If you're from Australia, there's also different options. There's something called an E3 that's available for certain healthcare occupations. There's special rules for Singapore. Chile has special rules as well. So there are some countries that have some very unique rules. But generally speaking, the H1 and the green card are the two routes that are the most sure routes.
Okay. Yeah. And Mike, our team and your team is working together with many applications in both of those categories, both the EB3 green card as well as the H1B visa that is available to pretty much all other healthcare workers. Do you see, Mike, are there ever any times where, even in rare cases, where a healthcare worker might be able to qualify in something other than the EB3 or the H1B visa category?
Sure. In theory, depending upon the level of experience and whether someone is right now, if you're involved in infectious disease work, your epidemiology, that's your specialty, then there might be an O visa option for someone like that. So I think there are some additional possibilities, but generally speaking, not so much.
Okay. Just staying on this topic for a minute longer. You had mentioned H1B and that there was special visas for persons born in Canada and Mexico, that there were, some special arrangements with Singapore and Chile. All of those, the H1B visa, these allow individuals to enter the U.S. and to work for a period of time in non-immigrant status. Mike, I think there'd be those on this call that would be interested in learning a little bit about, once if you are able to get into the U.S. on one of these visas in non-immigrant status, do you have the opportunity then at some point to obtain permanent residency status?
Yeah. So generally speaking, an employer that brings you in on an H1 or a TN or an E3 or any of those non-immigrant visas is ultimately going to sponsor you for a green card while you're here in the U.S. So often that process, they're going to have some limitations on when they're going to start it. They're going to wait 6 months or maybe a year, depending upon the facility. And then they'll start the green card sponsorship. And your sponsorship will in part look like it would have looked if you would have been overseas. So you'll go through the same process with roughly the same timings. However, the end of the process looks differently because you're in the U.S. It provides some work authorization for spouse and older children while the process is going on. But essentially, I would tell this of any hospital, if you're going to sponsor someone for a non-immigrant visa, a TN, an H1, and E3, you have to be willing to sponsor for a green card, or else there's no point, because there's limitations on how long you can work in the U.S. on an H1 or on an E3. There's not for TNs, but there are for the other categories. So one is simply a bridge. Think of it as a bridge to another opportunity, being the green card opportunity.
All right. Yeah, very good, Mike. And can you also take a moment and just touch on the importance or the requirements related to licensure? So professional licensure as a nurse, professional licensure in other occupations, the impact that this need for licensure has on access to these various visa options as well.
Yes, essentially for green cards, a licensure, you need to have taken and passed the exam, but you do not necessarily have to be licensed in any state. So you basically have a step before that has to be completed, but not necessarily the license. However, for a visa, an H1, a TN, an E3, you have to have the license in the state you're working in, or you have to have already met all the requirements for that licensure. The hurdle that a lot of people have is sometimes you cannot complete the license until you have a social security number. You can't get a social security number until you're eligible to work. So if you can demonstrate that you have met all the requirements for the licensure, I've done A, B, C, D, whatever those are in that state, and the only thing your hurdle is the social security number so they can complete your process, then you can get a non-immigrant visa. If, however, there is a hurdle to you can't complete all the requirements, then in that state, you cannot get a non-immigrant visa. So there are certain states where you are simply, depending on your occupation, precluded from getting a non-immigrant visa because you can never get all those things done. So it's not as simple as, hey, I'm a PT and man, I'd like to work in Nevada. And I don't know anything about Nevada. I'm just using that as an example. If Nevada is you need to be here for 30 days and take a safety exam, and you can't take that safety exam until you're here, then Nevada is not a state where you could go get an H-1B in. Now, there are ways to work around that. You may be brought into another state. Maybe there's a sister facility in another state. Maybe Vermont that has an easier licensing process, that you're brought in initially to Vermont. You then work in Vermont for a while. You then complete your licensing process in Nevada, and then you get transferred to a facility in Nevada. So there are ways to work around that, but the licensure piece is an extremely critical piece in the non-immigrant visa, where I'm not saying it's not critical on the green card side, but it's not as critical.
All right. Well, that's a great point. And I think for those that are joining us today, it's really important to note that having visas available is obviously very, very important to your ability to migrate to the U.S., but also the need to complete whatever professional examination or licensure requirements there may be is really the other half of that equation. And using the examples of registered nursing, for nurses, it's really that NCLEX exam, passing the NCLEX exam, that really opens that door to being able to pursue a green card permanent residency application in the U.S. Now, Mike, I know we have people joining us today that have various types of pending applications already underway, whether they be nurses or maybe nurse aides or MLTs. We've got folks that have joined us that have applications in various stages of processing. Can you maybe share your perspective on, how things are functioning these days at the NVC, And I know that a lot of those individuals that are registered nurses that are kind of at the 1 yard line, so to speak, in terms of being able to come to the U.S., facing delays in embassy interviews. Can you maybe just speak to the issue of the opportunity to have expedited embassy interviews approved as well?
Okay, so first of all, at the NVC right now, and I'm knocking on wood when I say this, but at the NVC right now, things are going pretty well. They do not have a tremendous amount of backlog. We're seeing some fairly fast processing from the NVC. We're seeing nice communication from them. They're emailing you back quickly. Right now, the NVC is pretty good right now. I will say the most common problem we have with cases at the NVC relate to bad copies of birth certificates. So if you've got a birth certificate and it's already a little hard to read, when you copy it and send it, it's going to be worse to read by the time the NVC looks at it. So I surveyed yesterday. We have about 12 paralegals here who work on NVC cases. And I walked around yesterday, like 9 of them were in the office, which I was pretty happy about, and said, hey, what's the number one problem at the NVC? And every single one of them told me the same thing. So take a look at your birth certificates and make sure we've got as clear of a copy as possible. Now, as far as expedited processing, so I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Expedited processing is the idea of, hey, I'm a healthcare worker. I'm important. I'm needed in the U.S. The healthcare system in the U.S. is strained and at its breaking point, et cetera. So move me to the front of the line. And the Department of State, who governs the consulates, has said, yes, we're going to put healthcare workers at the top of the line, so to speak. So they developed this process called expedited processing. And it's where it comes into play is after you're finished with the NVC. So after you are what everybody calls DQ, which I don't know if DQs exist anywhere else in the world, but once you get to the US, DQ is going to mean something different to you. It's going to mean ice cream. But for everywhere else, DQ means documentarily qualified. So the NVC's finished your case, they've sent it to the consulate, you're ready for an interview. It's at that time we ask for expedited processing, or you can personally ask for expedited processing. And as I mentioned earlier, virtually every consulate in the world is providing expedited processing. We're seriously having some people interviewed in non-Manila consulates within 2 weeks of them being DQ'd. Now, here's the thing. Every healthcare worker that's going through the process is asking for expedited processing. And every healthcare worker is being told either yes or we've noted it for your file, which is the same as yes. Which means once everybody's expedited, nobody's expedited. So it sounds great, but if you're in Manila, it doesn't mean anything because you've been expedited, but so is your friend and so is your cousin and so have people, strangers that you don't even know. Everybody's been expedited. So the line still remains long. Now, let me give you some information to be more positive about that. This is from about, today's the 26th. This is from 7 days ago. So fairly current information from the Department of State, okay? This is a quote from them. Recognizing the importance of healthcare workers, that's you guys, we've asked that our top healthcare issuing posts, particularly Manila, prioritize these applications. We expect to adjudicate 5,000 visa applications, so green card applications, for healthcare workers between now and the end of February. Manila has committed to adjudicating 4,000 visa applications for healthcare workers by the end of February. Now, whether this happens we all make promises from time to time, but the mere fact that we have the Department of State and these promises from the consulates, I think we're seeing already, we've seen a lot more activity in December and January than we had in November and October, et cetera. I think we're going to even see more over the next 6 to 8 weeks as they've all agreed to, I'm making this a priority. We're going to bend over backwards to get as many visas issued as possible. So I think we're then going to be able to feel more better about expedited processing as opposed to where we feel today, which we're just in the same long line.
Yeah, that really is good news and encouraging, Mike. I just want to stay on this topic of expedited processing for a moment. And as you said, the commitment to process all these interviews is wonderful, but right. And so here at WorldWide HealthStaff, we're receiving communications daily from candidates that say, I've applied for expedited processing. My friend applied after me. They've been approved. I haven't been approved. What's going on? What are you going to do about it? But can you just, from your perspective and what you see working with many different healthcare employers across the country, just kind of share what your observation and experience has been with regards to this, what I will call unevenness or unpredictability in who's being granted an expedited interview and who is not.
Yeah, there's a variety of factors, and it does change by post. But we're seeing people taken out of order all the time. And it is not just now. This is not a new phenomena of things being done out of order. This goes back 20 years, 25 years. I can't remember anything beyond 20 years. So this is not unusual. It's tough when it's you, and there may be no explanation other than that your file happened to be in a stack that they didn't pick up that morning. That may be the only explanation there is, okay? Which is not a good explanation, but the reality of how it's actually being handled. Now, there could be other factors. There could be something that they're waiting on in your case that you may look DQ'd from the MVC's perspective, but then they see something. It could be your school that maybe they always check. Keep in mind that one of the things the consulates are responsible for doing is confirming fraud. One of their tasks is to check educational documents to make sure that they're accurate, to check if experience documents are accurate, if those are relevant in a case. And they certainly have a list of schools that they know people have fraudulent documents from. Maybe you happen to have gone to one of those schools. And so now, as soon as that school shows up, they're going to do an extra check just to make sure yours is legit. So there may be things that you have no idea going on behind the scenes that affect your case. But it could also simply be the luck of the draw of this person's working and they finish these 10 cases and your stack is sitting on Sally's desk and Sally's out sick with COVID for the next 5 days. And so no one's picking up Sally's files because they have their own files. That it could be just as simple as that. So I wouldn't read anything into it. I wouldn't assume that there's a problem. It's probably not.
Okay, very good. Mike, just one other issue to touch on here before we kind of get into a conversation about what the immigration forecast is for the rest of this year and going forward. I know that in the recent past, there was a time where there was a real issue and real concern about people attending their embassy interviews and then being issued what was called a 221G notice, or a notification that there was still something outstanding or missing from their application for their visas to be issued. Again, this is going to be of particular interest to those of you that are coming up to your embassy interviews here soon. So Mike, can you just take a moment and comment on kind of how the 221G issue has evolved where it's kind of sitting at today.
Okay, sure. Yeah. 221G is simply a generic term. It's actually a particular regulatory statutory number that relates to anything, any question the consulate has before they issue the visa. It's used in non-immigrant visa cases like H-1s. It's used in immigrant visas. So 221G covers a broad category of things. It could be as simple as there's an issue with your medical exam, so we need you to go back and do ABC on your medical exam. It could be something much more complex, like you had a prior stay in the U.S. and they're verifying your unauthorized employment or a DUI you had while you were here in the U.S. So it could be something really complicated or something simple. Sometimes, from time to time, they're simply reaching back out to the hospital that sponsored you saying, hey, we have Rosalita's case right here. We want to confirm that you, in fact, sponsored Rosalita as part of just a random fraud check. Hospital verifies, yep, we did. She's great. We're so excited for her to be here. Can you move this along a little faster, please? And then your 221G is resolved. So sometimes it's simply that. Sometimes it's a matter of something larger. 221Gs generally are resolved fairly quickly. When I say fairly quickly, I'm using fairly quickly in the immigration context. And I would say fairly quickly is under 90 days, but not all of them. Some can be major roadblocks. Normally, we'll be able to tell whether there's a major roadblock or not. And there's a different variety of strategies that could be used. But generally, think of 221Gs as simply they're asking for more information. Some of it may even appear to be a repeat of something you've already given them that you know they already have. And you want to ask the question of why? Okay, that's a bad question to ask of the U.S. consulates. They control the power. We don't ask lots of why. We don't tell them a lot that they don't have the right to these documents. We simply try to pacify them. It's like dealing with a toddler. Just give them what they want is the easiest way to deal with a toddler. So that's generally how we deal with 221Gs.
All right, Mike, thanks. One more important point that I'd like us to touch on before we open up some time for question and answer, and it's really in a large part the focus of our presentation this morning, and that is, what's ahead? What do we see coming down the road for U.S. immigration? Do we see stability? Do we see the possibility of things changing for the better, not for the better? Take a moment, Mike, and just kind of give us your overview and your forecast for what you see coming down the road related to healthcare immigration, specifically in 2022 and beyond, if there's any visibility beyond that.
Okay, so during the prior Trump administration, legal immigration, saw a tremendous amount of policy changes that were deemed to be very negative to curtail and prevent and delay and block legal immigration. The Biden administration, in its first 90 days, struck down most of those provisions. So we are essentially back to where we were pre-Trump. Biden does not have a pro-legal immigration plan that has any expectation of anything positive happening. However, the mere fact that he took away all the prior hurdles that have been acted is in and of itself positive. So we are now back to status quo. And for those of us in this industry, status quo is way better than what we had. It's also better than some of the potentials that they've discussed. So our expectation, so we're going to view President Biden and immigration as positive on immigration, but we're not looking for him to engineer any major advancements or any major positive changes in it. What's done is already done. It's all been good. And now we're just back to normal. So I think that's how I would kind of sum up the Biden presidency relative to immigration.
Mike, do you see the impact of COVID moving the needle at all on any aspect of immigration regulation or legislation? I think one of the things that the pandemic has also done is it's gotten the healthcare staffing issue on the 6 o'clock news very frequently.
Yes.
And I think there's probably the greatest level ever of public awareness of just how fragile the healthcare workforce can be and how it's been impacted. Do you see sort of the consequences of the impact of COVID having some influence on immigration policy, regulation, legislation?
I'd like to say yes, but I'd be lying. I don't think so. And here's why. Is there has been an ongoing need for improvements to the legal immigration system and particularly healthcare opportunities for as long as I can remember. And COVID may have brought that to bear even more, but there are so many other issues that on the immigration side that there cannot be any agreement on, whether it's the amnesty programs for undocumented that are here, whether it's the DACA program or a variety of other programs that there can be essentially between the two parties absolutely no agreement on. You throw in the Trump control over the Republicans as it relates to immigration. Keep in mind, pre-Trump, Republicans generally were more positive and more pro-legal immigration than Democrats. Trump switched that. So you have more Democrats now in favor of immigration, not because they're in favor of immigration, but simply because they're against Trump. The Republicans that were pro-immigrant are no longer, like a Marco Rubio, that was a very, very strong senator advocate on behalf of increased legal immigration. Not now, because Trump's got his thumb on it. So I don't see anything positive happening. There are lots of talk. There's lots of exemptions, talks of exempting healthcare workers from quotas. And I think if that were allowed to be a standalone policy by itself, I think it would pass. But I don't think in today's congressional environment, anything standalone touching on immigration can even be considered. So maybe I'm too negative, but I don't see anything happening positively.
Yeah. Well, as you know, Mike, hope springs eternal, and we will, continue to watch very closely what developments may unfold. I think from where I sit after having done this work for 23 years, if nothing else, the public awareness of this issue is at a completely different level than it has ever been in the past. And assuming that elected officials at some point actually listen to the people that elect them, then perhaps we'll see some progress. Just real quick, Mike, is there, I know there's from time to time various legislative proposals that get put on the table. Is there anything pending right now legislatively that you think has a chance of seeing the light of day?
I don't. I think there are a lot of good things out there. There are things to recapture some old numbers that would deal with retrogression. I think that there are some proposals to exempt a lot of STEM workers from having to go through certain immigration process, which would really be a huge advancement for, say, med techs, for example. But I don't think legislatively we're going to see any action in 2022. We're already so close to the midterm elections, which of course is really 9 months away, but in political terms, that's close. So I don't. We may see some more regulatory changes. We just saw some STEM expansions late last week. So we may see something on the policy side. but I don't think legislation.
All right. Just for everyone that has joined us this morning, just a reminder that every one of you will receive by email within the next 24 hours a recording of today's presentation. In fact, everyone who registered, even if they weren't able to attend live today, will receive that email with a video recording of this presentation. And as you receive that email, I would encourage you to review, in particular, sections of today's presentation that may have been of particular interest to you. And by all means, feel free to share that recording with your friends and colleagues who you believe may be interested and may benefit from the great information that Mike has shared with us today. With that being said, we are going to take a few moments to answer some of the questions that have been coming in over the course of the past hour. So, Tracy, if you could just lead us through some of the more common questions that have been coming in, please.
Absolutely. And thank you both. Yeah, the questions are coming in quickly. And I just would like to please ask not to repeat your question. It will bump other questions out of the queue. So if you have a question out there, just, we will do our best to get to it. The first question, is there nothing to be done to reduce the 6 to 7 month time allotted to the ETA processing, considering the need to combat staff shortage?
Okay, so I think that relates probably to perm cases. Mike, any thoughts on the processing time of the Department of Labor approvals for perm cases?
Yeah, there's two parts to the Department of Labor process. The first part is a prevailing wage request. That back in the spring had increased to almost 10 months. It is back down to about 6 months. Historically, it's been in the 3 to 4 month range. That is simply a resource issue related to COVID and Department of Labor processing. Once the ETA 9089 is filed, their processing times had gotten as long as 7 months. They're back down to about 4 months right now. Historically, they've been in about the 3 to 5 month range. So they're about where they are right now. There is no expedite option available. There's no talk about any expedite option available. So it is simply something that the timing is likely going to stay where it is, even though it is certainly better today than it was this time last year.
Okay, very good. Tracy, next question, please.
Yes, and this is a question regarding premium processing, and this is a popular topic. First of all, do we provide free premium processing for everybody?
Well, I'll take that one. So first of all, there is no such thing as free premium processing. The premium processing fee is currently $2,500. And that fee has to be paid for premium processing service to be provided. The question is who's paying for the premium processing? And in some cases, employers will pay for that fee. In other cases, applicants will make the choice to pay for that fee themselves directly. I'll just say from our perspective, we do have some employers that do offer premium processing. Others do not. But let me also say, and Mike, I'll get you to comment on this, premium processing in and of itself isn't always going to result in your being able to arrive in the United States more quickly. Mike, can you just take a moment and just kind of review for everyone the function, the purpose, and the potential benefits and limitations of premium processing?
Sure. So keep in mind that premium processing only applies to the I-140 stage. So only one portion of the immigration process. So you've got the PERM or the ETA 9089 part of the process. If you're a part of PERM, like a med tech would be, a nurse aide would be, a CNA, et cetera. Then you've got the I-140 stage, and then you've got the NVC and the consular interview stage. premium only applies to that one stage. So you may premium your case, and then your case gets delayed at the NVC or gets delayed by the consulate. You may have sped your case up for just that one portion, not necessarily the rest. Now, I'm not saying premium's bad. It's not. It just doesn't always get you to the U.S. any faster. It gets you through that one stage faster. That's it.
Right. Okay. Very good. Tracy, any other questions? We're kind of at time, but we'll take another quick question or two before we wrap up today.
Absolutely. And this is one I've seen a lot, and it's about IELTS. Is there a possibility, have you ever heard of a possibility, that IELTS would be, if not eliminated, reduced, made easier, the ban requirements lessened? Have you heard anything about that with an English language exam?
Honestly, I haven't. Mike, have you heard any discussion? I think the current IELTS standard has been in place for as long as I can remember. The current IELTS standard and the current TOEFL standards. I've not heard any discussion, any consideration around those standards being changed. What is interesting is the requirements for IELTS and TOEFL or some form of a standardized English language test are actually higher in other countries than they are for healthcare workers looking to immigrate to the U.S. I know, just using the IELTS example, that registered nurses require an overall band score of 6.5, which has to include a score of 7, a minimum score of 7 in speaking. But it's also, I'm also aware that the IELTS score requirement for registered nurses to the UK is 7.0 in all 4 aspects of the IELTS exam. So the short answer to the question, Tracy, is no. We're not aware of any possibility of those standards being changed, and certainly not relaxed.
Right. And that's not something that WorldWide HealthStaff controls.
It is not. That is a requirement that's established by regulation, both in terms of immigration and in many cases professional licensure. So yeah, by no means do we have any control over that in any way, shape, or form.
No, absolutely. Just thanks for making that clear. Can I ask one more question? How are we doing?
More.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do one more.
Sure. All right. Is there a possibility that a nurse will be denied a visa during the embassy interview?
I'll let Mike take that, but I'll first say it's highly, in our experience, it's very unlikely. But Mike, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Sure. It's extremely rare. I mean, in the last 12 months here in our office, probably had between 2,000 and 3,000 RNs processed, and we've not seen any. But sure, it's possible. I would think the most common scenarios would be a situation where there was a change in the job offer. Maybe the hospital goes bankrupt. Maybe the job offer has been rescinded, but the nurse goes to the interview anyway. Or they determine that the nurse has false educational documents or something like that. Or something shows up in the criminal check and the nurse had really, hacked off the head of her last 8 colleagues. Something like that. But generally speaking, we don't see it.
All right. Well, very good, Mike. Thank you for that. And with that question, we'll wrap up our presentation for today. I know that we haven't been able to get to all the questions, but I hope that the questions that we have been able to answer and the information that has been shared has been very helpful to everyone that made the effort and the time investment of joining us today. If you are a registered nurse, you'll see at the top of the chat box, we've got a sticky note there, an electronic sticky note that gives you some information on how it is that you can apply with WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions. always encourage you to spend some time visiting our website at healthstaff.org, where you will find some great free resources that you can use to educate yourself on understanding job offers from U.S. employers, things that you should be looking for that should be in a job offer, things to be concerned about if you do find them in a job offer. So just a whole bunch of really good free resources that are freely available. And we encourage you to take the time and inform yourself and educate yourself, because obviously migrating from your home country here to the United States is a major lifetime event. If you just have general questions or comments that you would like to share, please feel free to reach out to us directly at any time. And Mike, any closing thoughts that you would have to share with the group as we wrap up this morning?
No, I'm just saying there's some great opportunities and things I think are going to continue to stay positive this year. I have a very bright outlook for healthcare workers actually arriving in the U.S. in 2022.
Good. Mike, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you join us. It's a pleasure just to connect with you always. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for your interest and your participation in our section in our presentation today. Please be on the lookout for information regarding our February webinar. Tracy, can you just briefly comment on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Stay tuned for our next webinar. We will be posting all updates in our social media channels. Check us out: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. And our next webinar in February is going to be February 24. And we're going to be meeting with our partners at CGFNS, the Alliance for Ethical International Recruitment. We'll be speaking with them on a webinar that is going to be titled Your Rights in Working with Recruitment Agencies. So we hope you can tune in and join us for that.
Tracy, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, wherever you may be, the rest of your week. WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions welcomes your inquiry at any time, and we look forward to joining you again soon on our next webinar presentation. Bye for now.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Tracy.